Section 22 of the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, translated by Courtney Langdon. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Inferno, Canto 22. The Eighth Circle, Fraud. The Fifth Trench, Corrupt Politicians.
Ere now have I seen cavalry break camp, start to attack, or be reviewed, and even at times retreat in order to escape. Scouts have I also seen upon your lands, O Aretines. Raids too have I beheld, and tournaments and tilting matches fought. With trumpets now, and now with bells, with drums and beacon signals made from fortresses. With native and with foreign things, but never have I seen horse or infantry or ship, by sign of either land or sky, set out with instrument of wind as odd as that. With the 10 demons we were going on. Ah, the fierce company! But in a church with saints consort, with gluttons at an inn. Upon the pitch alone was I intent, that I might see all details of the trench and of the people who were burned therein. As dolphins do when arching up their backs they give the warning which bids mariners take measures for the safety of their ship. Even so at times, his suffering to relieve, one of the sinners there displayed his back, and hid it in less time than lightning takes. And as in ditches at the water's edge frogs stay with nothing but their muzzles out, and thus conceal their feet and all the rest, even so on all sides did those sinners stay. And now that Barbariccia was approaching, they likewise 'neath the boiling pitch withdrew. I saw, and still it stirs my heart with horror, one waiting thus, as oft, while one frog stays, it happens that another scurries off. And Graffiacane, who was nearest to him, hooking his pitch-smeared tresses, pulled him up, so that an otter he appeared to me. I knew by now the names of each and all, I noted them so well when they were chosen, and when they called each other, noticed how.
O Rubicante, see thou set thy claws upon him so, that thou peel off his skin.
The accursed all cried out together then, and I, my teacher, if thou canst, contrive to learn who that wretch is, who thus has fallen into his adversary's hands. My leader thereupon drew near to him, and asked him whence he was, and he replied,
Of Navarre's kingdom I a native was. My mother placed me out to serve a lord, for she had borne me to a rascal knave, who both himself and what he owned destroyed. I next in good King Thibault's household served, and there I set myself to graft, for which I pay the reckoning in this heat.
Here Ciriato, from whose mouth protruded as from a boar's a tusk on either side, caused him to feel how one of them could rip. Among bad cats the mouse had fallen now, for Barbariccia clasped him in his arms and said,
Stand off, while I am clutching him.
Then toward my teacher having turned his face, he said,
Ask him again, if more thou wish to know of him, before the others rend him.
My leader then,
Now tell me, know'st thou any among the other sinners 'neath the pitch, who Latin is?
and he,
Not long ago I left a man from that vicinity. Would that like him I still were covered up, for I should then fear neither claw nor hook.
Here Librivox said,
We've borne too much.
and with his hook so seized him by the arm and tore it that he carried off a piece. And Dragignazzo also wished to clutch him down at his legs, but their decurion then turned right around at them with threatening looks. When they were somewhat pacified again, of him who was still looking at his wound my leader asked without delay,
Who then was he, from whom thou took'st unlucky leave, as thou hast said, to land upon the shore?
and he made answer,
That was Fra Gomita, Galura's man, vessel of all fraud, who, when he held in hand his master's foes, so dealt with them that each is glad. Their money he took, and, as he puts it, let them all off easy, and even in other offices was not a petty, but a first-rate grafter. With him Don Michel Zanche of Logodoro associates. And never do their tongues feel tired out by talking of Sardinia. But oh, look at the other grinning there. More would I say, but am afraid lest that one be making ready to claw my skin.
Then the great provost turned toward Farfarello, who rolled his eyes as if he meant to strike, and said,
Off yonder, thou malicious bird!
If you desire,
thereat began again the terror-stricken man,
to see or hear Tuscans or Lombards, I will have them come. But let the evil claws here stand aside a little, that their vengeance be not feared. And I, while sitting in this very place, for one that I am, shall make 7 come out, when I shall whistle, as our wont it is, when any one of us protrudes himself.
Cagnazzo at this speech his muzzle raised, and shook his head, and said,
Hear the sly trick devised by him to cast himself below.
Then he, who frauds in great abundance had, replied to him,
Tricky indeed am I, when for my mates a greater pain I win.
Here Alikin could not control himself, but said in opposition to the rest,
I shall not gallop after thee, in case thou dive, but o'er the pitch shall beat my wings, the ridge abandoned be the bank a screen, to see if thou alone art more than we.
Now, reader, of a new sport shalt thou hear. Each turned his eyes the other way, and he the first who had thereto been most opposed. The Navarrese chose well his time, stood firmly upon the ground, and jumping suddenly, from what they purposed, freed himself thereby. For this each felt himself to blame, but most the one who of the loss had been the cause. Hence he moved first, and shouted,
Thou art caught!
But little did it profit him, for wings could not outmeasure fear. As one went under, the other flying upward raised his breast. Nor different is the speed with which a duck dives under water when a hawk draws near, who, vexed and baffled thus, flies up again. Then Calcabrina, angered by the flout, flew out behind him, glad that one escaped, because it let him scuffle with the other. And then, the grafter having disappeared, he turned his claws upon his own companion, and grappled with him o'er the ditch. But he, being indeed a fighting sparrow-hawk fitted to claw him well, they both fell down into the middle of the boiling fen. A sudden separator was the heat, but rising thence was quite impossible, they had their wings so limed with sticky pitch. Then Barbariccia, vexed as were the rest, his mates had 4 of them with all their hooks fly to the other bank. On both sides then they speedily descended to their posts, and stretched their hooks out toward the pitch belimed, who now were cooked inside their crusted hides, and thus embarrassed we abandoned them.
End of Inferno, Canto 22. Section 23 of the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, translated by Courtney Langdon. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Inferno, Canto 23. The 8th Circle, Fraud. The 6th Trench, Hypocrites.
Silent, alone, and unaccompanied we went along, one first and one behind, as minor friars go when on the road. My thoughts, by reason of the present brawl, were turned to Aesop's fable, that wherein he talks about the frog and mouse. For now, and at this moment, are no more alike than one is like the other, if beginning and end be linked by an attentive mind. And even as one thought from another springs, so next from that one was another born, which doubled my first fear. Hence thus I thought, these devils have been scorned on our account, and with such injury and scoff indeed, that I believe that they are greatly vexed. If anger to ill will be joined, they'll come more fiercely after us than doth a dog the rabbit which he seizes with his teeth. Already I was feeling all my hair bristling with fear, when gazing back intent, I said, If, teacher, thou hide not thyself and me with speed, I dread the evil claws. We have them now behind us, and I so imagine them that I already feel them. And he,
If I were made of leaded glass, thine outward image I would not reflect more quickly than thine inward I receive. Even now thy thoughts were coming among mine with outlook and intent so similar, that I with both a single purpose formed. If it be true the right bank slopeth so, that to the following trench we can descend, we shall escape from this imagined chase.
He had not finished telling me his plan, when not far off I saw them coming on with wings outspread, intent on seizing us. My leader then took hold of me at once, even as a mother, by the noise aroused, and seeing close to her the burning flames, seizes her child and flees, and doth not stop, since caring more for him than for herself, even long enough to clothe her with a shift. And downward from the ridge of that hard bank his back he yielded to the hanging rock, which closes one side of the following trench. Water ne'er moved as swiftly through a sluice to turn the overshot wheel of a mill when closest to the paddles it approaches, as did my teacher o'er that selvage bank, bearing me down with him upon his back, as though his son I were and not his mate. His feet had hardly reached the trench's bed below when they were on the ridge above, just over us, but naught was now to fear, because the Providence on high, which willed to place them in the 5th trench as its servants, takes from them all the power of leaving it. A painted people found we there below, who, moving with exceedingly slow steps, shed tears, and in their looks appeared subdued and weary. Cloaks they had, equipped with cowls, lowered before their eyes, and cut like those which in Colonna fashioned for her monks. So gilded outside are they that they dazzle, but inside all are lead, and of such weight that those which Frederick clothed men with were straw. O cloak that wearies through eternity! We turned again as ever to the left, along with them, intent on their sad plaint. But owing to the weight, that weary folk came on so slowly that new company we had at every motion of our legs. Hence to my leader I, contrive to find some one whom we may know by deed or name, and while thus going move thine eyes around. And one, who heard my Tuscan speech, cried out behind us,
Stay your feet, O ye that run so quickly through the gloomy air. From me perhaps shalt thou receive what thou dost ask.
Thereat my leader turned and said,
Now wait, and then proceed according to his pace.
I stopped, and two I saw, those faces showed great mental haste to be with me, and yet their burden and the narrow path delayed them. On coming up to us they watched me long with eyes askance, and uttered not a word. Then toward each other turning, thus they spoke.
This one seems by the action of his throat alive.
But if they're dead, by what right then go they uncovered by the heavy stole?
And then addressing me, they said,
O Tuscan, who to the gathering of sad hypocrites art come, scorn not to tell us who thou art.
And I to them, on Arno's lovely stream, and in its famous town both born and bred, I'm in the body I have always had. But who are ye, adown whose cheeks there drips, as I perceive, so great a woe, and what the penalty which sparkles on you thus?
These orange cloaks,
one answered,
are of lead, and of such thickness are they, that the weights thus cause the scales that balance them to creak. We jovial friars were, and Bolognese, I Catalan, and Lodoringo he, by name, and chosen by thy town together, as one alone is usually called, to keep its peace. And such we were, as still in the Gardingo's neighbourhood appears.
O friars, I began, your evil deeds, but said no more, because there struck mine eyes one crucified by 3 stakes on the ground. On seeing me, sighs through his beard he blew, and writhed all over. Then Fra Catalan, informed thereby of what had happened, said,
The pinioned man thou gazest at advised the Pharisees that it expedient was to torture one man for the people's sake. Stretched crosswise, as thou seest on the road, and naked, he is forced to be the first to feel how much whoever passes weighs. And in like fashion suffer in this ditch his father-in-law, and others of the council, which proved a seed of evil for the Jews.
I then saw Virgil marvelling at him who in the figure of a cross was stretched so basely in eternal banishment. Then to the friar he addressed these words,
Be not displeased to tell us, an you may, if on the right there lie a crossing place, by means of which we two may issue hence, without black angels being forced to come and extricate us from this trench's bed.
Nearer than thou dost hope,
he then replied,
a crag there is, which at the great round wall begins, and all the cruel trenches spans, save that at this one it is broken down, and spans at naught. But ye can climb the ruins which from its base lie piled along the slope.
My leader kept his head bowed down a while, then said,
Wrongly did he report the thing, who yonder grapples sinners with his hook.
The friar then,
Among the many vices given the devil at Bologna, I once heard that he a liar is, and sire of lies.
Thereat my leader with great strides departed, somewhat disturbed by anger in his looks. Then I the burdened left, and followed on behind the footprints of beloved feet.
End of Inferno, Canto 23. Section 24 of the Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri, translated by Courtney Langdon. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Inferno, Canto 24. The Eighth Circle, Fraud. The Seventh Trench, Thieves.
When in the youthful season of the year the sun beneath Aquarius warms his locks, while southward now the nights pursue their way, and when the hoar-frost draws upon the ground the counterfeit of her white sister's face, though shortly lasts the temper of her pen, the peasant, lacking provender, gets up, looks out, and seeing all the country white, slaps himself on the thigh, returns indoors, and walking to and fro laments, poor wretch, not knowing what to do. Then later on, returning out again, recovers hope, on seeing that the world has shortly changed its face, and taking down his shepherd's staff, out to their feeding drives his tender sheep. Even thus my teacher filled me with dismay when I beheld such trouble in his face. Thus too the plaster quickly reached the wound, for when we had attained the ruined bridge, my leader turned to me with that sweet look which at the mountain's foot I first perceived. First, having well surveyed the ruined arch, after some counsel taken with himself, his arms he opened, and took hold of me. And like a man who ponders while he acts, and always seems to look ahead, even so, while upward to the top of one great rock he pushed me, he sought out another crag, and said,
Take hold of that one next, but first see whether it be fit to bear thy weight.
No path was this for one who wore a cloak, since scarcely could we two, though he was light, and I was pushed, ascend from rock to rock. And had the slope on that bank not been shorter than on the other, I know not of him, but I would surely have been overcome. But since the whole of Malebolge slopes down to the opening of the lowest well, such is the nature of each trench's banks, that one is high and low the following one, and yet we reached at length the ridge above, from which the crag's last rock projects. My breath was so exhausted from my lungs, when up at last, that I could go no further. Nay, on arriving, I sat down at once.
Thus henceforth must thou rid thyself of sloth.
My teacher said,
For one attains not fame sitting on cushions or neath canopies, and he that lives without attaining it leaveth on earth such traces of himself as smoke doth in the air or foam in water. Therefore get up, o'ercome thy troubled breath with that soul energy which wins all fights unless it sink beneath its body's weight. A longer stairway must be climbed. 'Tis not enough that these stairs have been left. If then thou understand me, let it profit thee.
I thereupon arose, and showed myself better equipped with breath than I had felt, and said, Go on, for I am strong and bold. We took the pathway up along the crag, which rocky was, narrow and hard to climb, and steeper far than was the one before. Not to seem weak, I talked as on I went. This from the next trench caused a voice to come, which was incapable of forming words. Though I was on the summit of the arch which crosses here, I know not what it said, but moved to anger seemed the one who spoke. Downward I looked, and yet my living eyes could not attain the bottom for the dark. Hence, Teacher, try to reach the following ridge, said I, and let us from the wall descend, for as I hear but do not understand, so looking down from hence I make out nothing.
No other answer give I thee,
he said,
save that of action, for a fair request ought to be met by deeds without a word.
We climbed down from the bridge's further head, where to the 8th embankment it is joined, and then the trench was clearly shown to me, and in it I beheld a frightful throng of snakes, and of so weird a kind that still the memory of them freezes up my blood. Let Libya and her sand no longer boast, for though she breed Chelidri, Jaculi, with Cencri, Phareae, and Amphisbaenae, ne'er with all Ethiopia did she show, nor e'en with what above the Red Sea lies, either so many or such evil plagues. Among this cruel and most dismal swarm people were running nude and terrified, and with no hope of hole or heliotrope. Their hands were bound behind their back with snakes, whose tail and head were thrust between their loins and tied together in a knot in front. Then lo, a serpent hurled himself at one, who near our bank was standing, and transfixed him there where the neck is to the shoulders joined. Never were or or e so quickly written, as he took fire, and burning up must needs turn wholly into ashes as he fell. Whereat, though thus destroyed upon the ground, the dust, assembling of its own accord, turned instantly into the self-same man. So likewise, as great sages have declared, the phoenix dies, and then is born again, as she approaches her 500th year. She feeds through life on neither herbs or grain, but on a momum only and incense tears. Her final swaddling bands are nard and myrrh. And as is he who falls, nor knoweth how, by demon force, which pulls him to the ground, or other inhibition binding man, and who on getting up again looks round wholly bewildered by the great distress which he has felt, and as he looks heaves sighs, such was that sinner after he had risen. O power of God, how truly just thou art, that in revenge dost deal such blows as these. Thereat my leader asked him who he was, and he replied,
Into this wild ravine I reigned from Tuscany not long ago. Mule that I was, a beast's life, not a man's, I liked. I'm Vanni Fucci, called the Beast. For me Pistoia was a worthy den.
Then, tell him not to slip away, I said, and ask what fault thrust him down here, for I once saw in him a man of blood and strife. The sinner then, who understood, feigned not, but turned toward me both mind and face, and said, as with a sudden shame he coloured up,
That thou hast caught me in the misery in which thou seest me, gives me greater pain than that which took me from the other life. I can't refuse what thou dost ask of me. I'm placed thus low, because 'twas I who robbed the vestry known for its fair ornaments. A deed once falsely put upon another. But now, lest thou enjoy this sight of me, if thou art ever out of these dark lands, thine ears to my announcement ope, and hear. Pistoia first despoils herself of Neri, then Florence changes folk and government. From Valdimacra Mars draws forth a bolt, by turbid clouds enveloped. Next, with wild and cruel storm, a battle will be fought upon the Picene plain. Then suddenly the bolt will cleave the mist in such a way that every Bianco will thereby be wounded. And this I've said, that it may give thee pain.
End of Inferno, Canto 24.